After more than 3 decades of giving everything to my daughter, her education, her wedding, even the house she lives in, I thought I had a place in her heart. But on Mother's Day, she gave her mother-in-law a diamond ring and handed me a plastic flower. That was the day I realized I wasn't her mother anymore. I was just her wallet. Before we dive into all of this, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Connecting with viewers across the world is a huge source of inspiration for us. I didn't expect anything grand that Mother's Day. I never do. But I suppose I didn't expect to feel invisible either. That morning, I woke up to the familiar creak of the old wooden floor beneath my feet and the pale morning light spilling through the lace curtains Harold had loved. He used to say it made the house feel soft. Harold's been gone 3 years now, and the house isn't soft anymore. It's just quiet. I made coffee for one and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from the mug. I used to talk to the steam. I'd say good morning to the ghost of our life. But lately, it felt like even the ghost had moved on. The phone rang late the night before Rachel, my daughter. Her voice had that tone. Not warm, not cruel, just polite. "Mom, we're having brunch at Ethan's mom's house tomorrow. 1 o'clock sharp. You should come." Should. Not we'd love to have you. Not I'd love to see you. Just an obligation wrapped in civility. Still, I said yes. I always do. I arrived at Claire Bailey's house, Rachel's mother-in-law, exactly at 1 o'clock. The driveway was full of luxury SUVs and freshly detailed sedans. I parked my aging sedan down the street, checked my lipstick in the mirror, and walked up the pristine flagstone path. Claire's home looked like something out of a magazine. All white marble floors, cascading flower arrangements, and that overwhelming scent of lemon polish and wealth. I could hear laughter from the backyard before I even rang the bell. I stepped through the gate, and there they were, my daughter, sitting close to Claire, whispering like old sorority sisters. Ethan was at the grill, flipping steaks like a man born into comfort. Everyone was chatting. Everyone belonged. Except me. "Margaret!" Claire chirped, her smile perfected by years of charity galas. "So glad you could make it." "Hi, Mom," Rachel said, not even getting up. "You can sit over there." She gestured to the far end of the patio table. I sat, quietly, on the fringe of the scene. It was like watching a movie where you recognize everyone but can't remember how you're connected. The food came and went. Conversations rose and fell without my voice in them. Then came the gift exchange. Rachel stood up, radiant, practically glowing. "Claire, we have something special for you." Ethan handed her a small velvet box and an envelope. I knew instantly this wasn't some scented candle or handmade trinket. This was a gift meant to be remembered. Claire opened the box and gasped. A ring. Diamond. Easily $20,000 or more. It caught the sunlight like a net made of stars. "Oh, Rachel, this is too much." Claire laughed, covering her mouth with her perfectly manicured fingers. "It's not too much for the woman who raised such an incredible son," Rachel gushed, hugging her. "And there's more." She opened the envelope. "Cruise tickets. 2 weeks in the Mediterranean. First class." Claire actually cried. People clapped. Someone even took a video. I smiled. I clapped. And I felt something cold settle inside me, like a frost that started in my stomach and crept outward. Then it was my turn. "For Grandma Margaret," Ethan said, less enthusiastically. Rachel walked over and handed me a small bag, something you'd find near the checkout line at a gas station. Inside was a plastic flower, the kind they sell at dollar stores, and a card. Generic. Printed. "Happy Mother's Day," the card read. Underneath, in Rachel's handwriting, "Thanks for everything, Mom." That was it. No cruise, no diamond, not even a scented candle. Just a plastic flower and a thank you note that felt like it was meant for a grocery store cashier. The table fell quiet. Even Claire looked uncomfortable. Ethan shifted in place. I managed to smile. "It's lovely," I whispered. "Thank you, dear." But Rachel had already turned away. She was back beside Claire, chatting about ports in Italy and excursions in Greece. And I was still holding that flower. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with that plastic flower in front of me, wondering when exactly I had stopped being seen. Was it when Harold died? When I retired? Or had it happened so gradually I hadn't noticed until this very moment? 43 years of motherhood, of sacrifice, of giving, and that flower, that was all I was worth. Sleep wouldn't come that night. I tried reading. I tried the old classical playlist Harold used to put on when the world felt too loud. I even tried praying, but my thoughts wandered back to that moment at the ring, the cruise tickets, the applause, and then to the plastic flower, sitting limp on my kitchen counter like a joke with no punchline. At 2:17 a.m., I gave up. I wrapped myself in Harold's old flannel robe and padded down the hallway to the room I hadn't really entered since he passed the home office. It smelled like paper and dust and memories. This was once the command center of our life. The room where I built Hartwell Consulting from nothing more than a notepad and a typewriter. The room where Harold used to drop in with coffee and smile like he couldn't believe the woman he married had her name on a building downtown. I flicked on the lamp and stood there for a long time. Then I sat at the desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a manila folder labeled in my own handwriting, Rachel, College. Inside, tuition statements, housing payments, book receipts, and half a dozen notes I'd scribbled to myself on post. It's reminders to send care packages, transfer funds, replace a laptop she spilled coffee on. I added it all up. $47,000. Not counting the Toyota I bought her junior year. I moved on to the next folder. Wedding. R.E. 58,000. Venue, dress, catering, photography, a live band she absolutely had to have. I paid for it all. Not because I had to, because I wanted her day to be perfect. I remembered Claire offering to bring wine. One case. That was her contribution. But somehow, Claire became the woman worthy of Mediterranean cruises and diamonds. Another folder. House, Riverside. Rachel and Ethan couldn't afford the home they wanted, so I co-signed. Then quietly covered the mortgage for 6 months when Ethan's business went under and they didn't want to stress the kids. 3 car loans, all just until they got on their feet. $85,000 transferred in 2019 when Ethan's landscaping business nearly collapsed. I remember Rachel crying on the phone, and me typing the bank information through tears of my own. And now I got a plastic flower. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the realization that my giving had become invisible, not appreciated, expected. I stared at the spreadsheet I'd created. I was nearing $400,000, not counting the ongoing monthly support mortgage payments, business contracts, even the bookkeeping jobs I sent her way through my clients. Hartwell Consulting employed dozens of people, but I made sure Rachel had steady side work, even though she barely logged 5 hours a week. They didn't just depend on me. They had built their entire adult lives around me like I was a foundation they never had to thank or acknowledge. I scrolled through our text messages. They were all transactional. Can you wire money today? David needs to borrow the truck. Kids need school supplies. Do you have any leftover Southwest points? No, how are you? No thinking of you. No, do you need anything? I closed the laptop. Suddenly the room felt too small, too full of numbers, and not enough meaning. The next morning, I sat in the same office with a cup of coffee I didn't remember brewing and called my lawyer. Susan, I said when she picked up, I need to talk to you. Today. She didn't ask why. Susan had been my attorney for over a decade. She knew the tone in my voice. Her office overlooked the city. The same city I once ruled with a calendar and a briefcase and a BlackBerry. I used to love looking down at the streets below, thinking about all the ways I'd made something out of nothing. But that morning, the view didn't inspire me. It just reminded me how far I'd let myself drift from the woman I used to be. Susan brought in tea and shut the door. You look tired, she said gently, sitting across from me. I am, I said, tired of being responsible for everyone except myself. She waited. I want to sell the company. She blinked. Margaret, Hartwell is your life's work. I know, I said quietly. That's exactly why I need to let it go. She asked for the whole story, so I gave it to her. The flower, the years of quiet giving, the way I'd become a bank account in my daughter's eyes, and the way that brunch had finally opened mine. When I was finished, Susan leaned back and tapped her pen against the edge of her notepad. You want to sell? To find out if Rachel loves you or your checkbook. I met her eyes. Number I want to sell because I love her. But I can't keep enabling her. I need to stop pretending this is what family looks like. Susan nodded. We spent the next hour going over the logistics valuations, timelines, buyers. She promised confidentiality. I promised clarity. This won't be easy, she warned. I know, I said. But it will be honest. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls. One to Ethan, informing him I'd be getting quotes from other landscaping companies for my commercial properties. One to my bookkeeping clients, letting them know Rachel's services would end in 60 days. And one to myself, a promise that from now on, I would no longer spend my life trying to earn love through sacrifice. That night, I went into the kitchen, picked up the plastic flower, and placed it in a vase on the windowsill, not as a reminder of pain, but as a marker. The moment I decided to stop watering what would never grow. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. It started with whispers. Rachel heard it from someone at Ethan's golf club. Ethan heard it again at the Chamber of Commerce. Just murmurs, questions. Is Hartwell being sold? Do you think she's retiring? Have you heard anything? The third time, the question came directly to Rachel from one of her former bookkeeping clients. I heard your mom might be stepping down. Is that true? Should we be looking for a new bookkeeper? Rachel called me that evening. Mom, she said, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Patterson said you're not referring her bookkeeping anymore. What's going on? I'm just simplifying things, I said gently. It's time for some streamlining. But that's my income. I'm sure you'll find other opportunities. You're very capable. There was a long silence. Then a clipped, okay, and she hung up. I didn't hear from her the next day, but the following morning, I came home from a meeting with Susan to find the front door slightly ajar. I froze. I live in a safe neighborhood, but even so, I moved carefully through the hallway. Nothing seemed out of place until I reached my office. Rachel was sitting at my desk. My laptop was open, papers scattered, her face tight with frustration, eyes darting between lines on a contract she had no right to read. She looked up as I entered, startled, then hardened. Mom, she said, her voice sharp. What is this? I shut the door behind me. You tell me. She gestured at the papers. Are you really selling the company? I didn't answer right away. I walked slowly across the room, picked up the confidentiality agreement she'd clearly opened. Did you come here to snoop? Or did Ethan send you? I came here because you're acting like someone I don't recognize. Cutting off my clients, pulling contracts from Ethan, and now selling your company without telling your family. I looked at her, 35 years old, sitting in the chair where I built my life's work, demanding answers about things that had never been hers. Rachel, I said, my voice steady. This is my company, my decision. But we're family. You can't just make decisions that affect all of us without even a conversation. You mean like you did on Mother's Day? That stopped her. She looked down for a moment, then back up defensive now. That was a misunderstanding. We were tight on money. The cruise was Ethan's idea. Was the $20,000 ring his idea too? Her face flushed. That's not fair. I sat down across from her. Do you know how much I've given you and Ethan over the years? We never asked you to keep track. I didn't. Until now. $400,000, Rachel. That's the rough tally. College, wedding, cars, your house, Ethan's bailouts, the bookkeeping referrals. That truck you use? Mine. The mortgage you handle? I've been paying it. She didn't say anything. I didn't keep track because I was keeping faith, I said. I thought one day you'd turn around and say thank you. Or at the very least, ask how I'm doing. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't realize. No, I interrupted. You did realize. You just didn't care enough to act on it. And that's what hurts. She stood up, pacing now. So, what? This is revenge? This is freedom. She stared at me, stunned. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I said. I'm doing this to finally stop hurting myself. But what happens to us? I shrugged slightly. You find your own way. Like I did. like grown-ups do. Hair jaw tightened. We're not children. No, I agreed. You're not. Which is exactly why I'm not going to keep treating you like one. She grabbed her purse and stormed past me. At the door, she turned. This is a mistake. I looked at her not with anger, but with something deeper. Sadness. The mistake, I said softly, was letting it go on this long. She left, and for the first time in years, I didn't chase after her. The next morning, the phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. Rachel. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again. By the time I finished my coffee, she'd called 12 times. On the 13th, I picked up. Mom, please, we need to talk about this. We did talk. You can't just destroy everything because of a misunderstanding. I took a breath. Rachel, you don't understand. This isn't about destroying anything. It's about creating something for myself. Her voice broke. But we'll lose everything. Maybe it's time you learn how to build something of your own. She hung up, then called back, and again. By noon, she'd called 28 times. That afternoon, I sat down with Susan to review the final offer. The Bayer National firm had made a generous proposal. The terms were solid. The transition would be clean. As I signed the preliminary agreement, Susan looked at me carefully. You're sure? I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Later that evening, I stood at the window, watching the sunset cast long golden streaks across the street. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Rachel. Mom, I love you. I'm sorry. Please don't do this. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't believe her, but because, for once, I needed her to sit in the silence and ask herself what that love really meant. The sun was unusually bright that Tuesday morning. I remember that because the light bounced off the glass conference table and made everything look sharper too sharp. The kind of sharp that made you aware of things you'd normally ignore. The smudge on the window, the paperclip left askew, the exact moment a signature becomes a doorway. I was seated in Susan's downtown office, flanked by 2 representatives from the acquiring firm. They were polite, professional, and almost too cheerful. The man on the left, Derek, I think made a comment about how rare it was to inherit such a streamlined operation. I smiled, said nothing. What I wanted to say was, it wasn't streamlined when I started it. It was built on sleepless nights, cold calls, and coffee-stained ledgers. But none of that mattered anymore. The story was ending, and this was the last page. Susan handed me the pen. All that's left is your signature, she said gently, like a priest offering last rites. I took it, paused for a breath, and signed. The moment the pen left paper, I felt it. Not regret, not fear, just release. A weight lifting, a room exhaling. I looked out the window. Across the street stood the building that used to bear my name, Hartwell Consulting. Soon, the sign would come down. The name would change. The world would move on. And so would I. By the time I got home, I had 17 missed calls. 4 from Ethan, 13 from Rachel. I ignored them, but when the doorbell rang long and hard, I knew who it was. Rachel. I opened the door to find her standing there, hair unbrushed, mascara smudged like she hadn't slept. Mom, we need to talk, she said before I could speak. I stepped aside, but didn't say a word. She walked into the living room and spun around, arms crossed, as if trying to build a wall out of her own posture. David lost the chamber contracts. My clients are gone. The mortgage is still due next week. What are we supposed to do? I closed the door softly behind me. I don't know, I said. You don't know? You always know. You always fix things. I used to, I replied. That was before I realized it wasn't fixing. It was enabling. Rachel blinked, caught off guard by the word. She sat down on the couch and looked around like she didn't recognize the house. This place feels different, she murmured. It is. How long have you been planning this? I sat across from her, folding my hands in my lap. Long enough to understand that I wasn't living my own life. She stared at me. I never asked you to give so much, but you took it, I said softly. Again and again, without ever asking how much I had left. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know you felt that way. Because you didn't want to know. She looked away. I thought we were family. I thought families supported each other. Support, I said, is mutual. What we had wasn't support. It was a one-way street. I'm sorry, she whispered. I nodded. I believe you mean that. But I don't think you understand it yet. She stayed for an hour, most of it in silence. At one point she asked, Are you really moving? Yes. Where? Upstate. Near Scaniatella's Lake. That's far. Far enough to feel like a new life. The next day, the moving truck arrived. I didn't have much. 30 years of business files were boxed and labeled for archive. I didn't want them, but I also couldn't throw them away. Not yet. What I took were the essentials. My books, Harold's old records, the quilt my mother made the day Rachel was born, and a ceramic mug from a company retreat 20 years ago. It said, Build something worth keeping. I suppose I had. But now, it was time to let go. The lake cottage was small but perfect. It sat at the end of a gravel path, surrounded by wildflowers and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ache, it soothes. The back porch faced the water, and I could already picture myself sitting there in the mornings with a book and a blanket. Nancy Holloway, my new neighbor, greeted me with a pie and a warm smile. Welcome to the best part of your life, she said. I wanted to believe her, and maybe, in time, I would. Rachel didn't call for 3 weeks. Not once. No texts, no emails. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. There were nights I stared at my phone, half hoping her name would appear. But it didn't. And I didn't chase her, because I wasn't that woman anymore. I'd been Margaret the provider, Margaret the rescuer, Margaret the safety net. Now I was just Margaret, and I was learning how to love that version of me. One morning, I woke up to birdsong and sunlight pouring through the cottage windows. The lake outside shimmered like glass. I made coffee, wrapped myself in Harold's flannel robe, and stepped onto the porch. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel responsible for anyone else's happiness, only my own. The first domino fell in early September. David's landscaping company, Bailey Grounds and Design, missed payroll for the second time in a month. The bank called, then the tax office, then the equipment leasing company. Rachel had no idea how quickly it could unravel. She had always assumed things would stabilize, that something or someone would step in like always, like Mom. But Margaret wasn't there anymore, and the safety net she once took for granted was now just empty air. By the 3rd week of September, David came home from a job site looking pale and defeated. We're done, he said, slamming a manila folder on the kitchen counter. We can't make it through October. Rachel picked up the folder. Final notices. Outstanding invoices. A formal notice of breach from the Chamber of Commerce contract Margaret had once arranged for them. She really sold it, Rachel whispered, more to herself than to him. I didn't think she'd actually go through with it. David shot her a look, half disbelief, half accusation. That company paid our mortgage. My guys' salaries. You thought she was bluffing? Rachel didn't answer. She didn't know how. They filed for bankruptcy on the first Monday of October. The same week, Rachel's final bookkeeping client informed her they had hired a full-time in-house team. Nothing personal, the email said. You've been great. She stared at the screen for 10 full minutes before closing her laptop and sliding it aside. The house began to feel too big, not just in space, but in silence. Tommy and Sarah, her kids, were in school all day. David was home more now, but that didn't help. It just made the tension more concentrated. He'd snap at small things: burnt toast, an unpaid bill, the sound of the washing machine running too long. You told me we'd be fine, he said one evening, holding a pink slip from the utility company. No, Rachel replied. You told me we'd be fine. They didn't sleep in the same bed that night, or the night after that. She thought about calling her mother dozens of times, but what would she even say? You were right? I'm sorry? Please fix it again? Each thought collapsed under the weight of her own pride. Instead, she stared at the plastic flower still sitting on the kitchen windowsill. It had moved with her from Margaret's house years ago. She'd never thrown it away, though she had no idea why. Now, she did. By November, the mortgage company began calling. And this time, There was no one to silently pay the difference from behind the curtain. Rachel called David's mother Claire, hoping for something. A bridge loan, maybe. A place to stay temporarily. Claire listened, then said, "You're a grown woman, Rachel. It's time to act like one." Click. The line went dead. And for the first time in a long time, Rachel cried. Not the hot tears of frustration or anger, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes when you realize no one is coming. The final conversation with David happened the week before Thanksgiving. They were in the kitchen again. Of course, it had to be the kitchen. That's where so many of her life's pivotal moments had played out. "I'm moving out," he said, not even looking at her. "Where will you go?" "My brother's for now. Then, I don't know." "Are we really doing this?" Rachel asked, her voice thin and cracked. David shrugged. "We're not a team anymore. Haven't been in a while." And just like that, the last thread frayed. Rachel stood in the middle of the kitchen long after he left, arms folded, staring at the flower in the window. It hadn't moved, hadn't changed, just existed. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands. The plastic was cheap, the kind that flaked at the edges. It didn't bend, didn't wilt, didn't feel real. But it was the only thing in the room that hadn't abandoned her. That night, she sat down with a pen and a blank sheet of paper and tried to write. She crossed out the first line, then the second. By the third, her hand steadied. "Dear Mom, I've been trying to write this letter for weeks, maybe months. I think the truth is I've been trying to write it in my heart longer than that. I just didn't know how to say the things that need to be said without sounding like I was asking for something. So let me be clear from the start. I'm not asking. I'm writing to say I see now. I see what I didn't see when it mattered. What I refused to see. You gave more than you ever had to. Not just money. You gave your time, your attention, your care. And I didn't say thank you. Not really. I see now that you weren't just a mother who provided. You were a woman who carried more than anyone ever should have been asked to. And instead of offering you rest, I asked you to carry more. I don't know if you'll forgive me. I don't even know if you'll respond. But I needed to say it anyway. I'm sorry. Love." Rachel. When the letter was done, she didn't fold it. She just sat there, staring at the words until they blurred. Then she walked to the mailbox. She dropped it in before she could change her mind. And in that small, Actone envelope, one late apology, she felt something shift. Not fixed, not finished, but possible. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. It arrived on a Wednesday. The envelope was pale blue. My name written in careful, deliberate print across the front, Margaret Doyle. Not Mom, not Mother, just my full name. As if the sender wasn't sure they had the right to call me anything more. I stood on the porch, still in my garden gloves, the envelope resting atop the day's mail like it didn't quite belong. The air smelled of rain and basil. My hands were dirt-stained, and I could still feel the damp earth from pulling weeds out back. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I set the rest of the mail on the kitchen counter and left the letter on the table, unopened, while I made tea. It watched me, like it knew. By the time I finally sat down with it, the tea had gone cold. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the corners, and then I read, line by line, word by word. Her handwriting was smaller than I remembered, neater, almost like she'd practiced. It felt like a whisper from a different version of Racheloni I'd stopped believing existed. And as I read, my breath caught somewhere between relief and heartbreak. She didn't ask for anything. Not forgiveness. Not help. Not another bailout. Just acknowledgement of what she'd failed to see. I set the letter down after the last line, but I didn't move. My heart wasn't racing. It wasn't even aching. It was still, like the lake at sunrise. Like silence that isn't lonely. Like peace, tinged with memory. I didn't write back. Not that day. Not the next. Something in me knew I couldn't rush this. That healing isn't something you owe someone on their timeline, especially when the wound had been open for years. I didn't want to reopen it too soon, not even for the sake of closure. Sometimes distance isn't a punishment. It's protection. For both people. Instead, I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the drawer by my bed. The same drawer that held Harold's old watch, the last birthday card he ever gave me, and a photo of Rachel at 5 years old, missing her front teeth and holding a dandelion like it was treasure. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I might, but instead, I made fresh tea, walked out to the back porch, and sat in my usual chair facing the lake. Nancy came by a few minutes later, uninvited but welcome, carrying a basket of just-picked peaches. "I won't stay long," she said. "Just thought you'd want the good ones before the squirrels get 'em." I smiled and took one, biting into the soft flesh. Sweet, messy, perfect. After a while, I said, "My daughter wrote me a letter." Nancy nodded slowly, not pushing, not asking. She said she's sorry, not just for the flower, for everything. "And?" Nancy asked, her voice warm and steady. "I believed her," I said. "That's the hard part. I didn't expect to." Nancy leaned back in her chair. "Sometimes it takes the loss to see the shape of what we had. Or what we took," I added. We sat in silence for a while. The lake rippled quietly, and a heron glided low across the water like it knew where it was going. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen window. I didn't do it for Rachel. Not directly. I did it because somewhere inside me, I needed to mark the moment, to say, she saw me. At last, she saw me. That doesn't undo the years. It doesn't stitch every fray back together. But it's a thread. And threads, when handled gently, can become something again. Maybe not what they were, but something. The first frost came early this year. One morning, I stepped outside with my tea, and the grass crackled beneath my slippers. The lake had a thin skin of silver, the kind that would melt by mid-morning but still whispered, "Winter is coming." And yet, I didn't feel cold. I felt still. It had been 3 weeks since Rachel's letter arrived. I hadn't responded. Not out of punishment, not out of pride, but because something in me needed silence more than closure. I wasn't ready to speak, but I was ready to listen. Not to her, to myself. That afternoon, I pulled out a fresh notebook. Not the kind I used for business reports or budgets or client notes. This one was soft leather, warm brown, the kind that felt like a thing made to hold truth. And I began to write. Not a reply. Not exactly. More like a reckoning. Dear Rachel, you were my beginning. I don't think you ever knew that. Before you, I was Margaret Doyle. Eager, ambitious, always moving forward like life was something I could conquer with planning and persistence. Then you came along, and I learned a new language. One made of rocking chairs and midnight feedings and lullabies hummed off key. You taught me that love wasn't achievement. It was repetition. It was showing up. Again and again. And I did. Through scraped knees and heartbreaks and graduation gowns. Through that first year of your marriage, when everything felt like it might fall apart. And I stood quietly in the background, ready with casseroles and quiet advice. You called me strong. But you didn't see the nights I cried in the laundry room because I didn't know how to say no without feeling like I was abandoning you. You didn't see the way I skipped vacations, passed on new furniture, clipped coupons so I could make sure your house felt whole. I never told you that because it felt like love to me, until one day it didn't. Until the giving turned invisible, and I started to feel like a credit card with a pulse. I paused my writing and looked out the window. A pair of ducks waddled down the hill toward the lake. The water had thawed in the sun, and they moved together like they'd done it 1,000 times. No need for words, just motion, rhythm, trust. Back to the notebook, I wrote, "I don't blame you. That might be the hardest truth to put on paper. I don't blame you for needing help. I don't blame you for struggling. I don't even blame you for forgetting to say thank you sometimes. But I do hold you accountable for not trying, for not wondering if I was okay, for not asking how I was managing after your father died, when the world I built with him disappeared overnight, for never calling just to talk. Not about the kids, not about money, just me. Rachel, I missed being your mother long before I stopped being your bank." That line stayed with me after I wrote it. I underlined it. I missed being your mother long before I stopped being your bank. Nancy stopped by that afternoon. She brought cinnamon bread and a thermos of cider. We sat in the sunroom, her laugh filling the space like it belonged there. At one point, she asked, "You ever think you'll send her something back?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Maybe. One day. But not yet. I'm still learning how to talk to myself." That night I sat by the fireplace, quilt across my lap, and reread the pages I'd written. Not once did I feel bitterness. Only clarity. Only breath. I didn't mail the letter. I folded it, placed it in the same drawer where Rachel's rested, and tucked both beside Harold's old watch. I lit a candle on the windowsill, not for grief, but for gratitude. Gratitude that I had lived long enough to see my own life clearly. Gratitude that even heartbreak can be a doorway to peace. Gratitude that I had finally learned. I am allowed to choose myself. The first time I touched clay, I expected it to feel cold. I expected resistance. Something stiff and unyielding like the walls I'd built around myself for years. But it wasn't like that. It was warm, responsive. It changed with every movement of my hands. You don't shape clay by forcing it. Our instructor, Joy, told us that morning. You guide it. You work with it. The more control you try to exert, the more it collapses. I thought of Rachel, of all the times I'd tried to hold her together, of all the times I collapsed in the process. The pottery class met every Thursday morning in a converted barn behind the library. A dozen women, most of us over 60, gathered around a table with plastic aprons, coffee thermoses, and soft conversation. There was something sacred about that space. No one talked about their past unless they wanted to. No one asked, "What did you used to do?" Or "Do your children visit often?" We talked about the texture of glaze, about what colors reminded us of autumn, about hands, how they've aged, what they've held, who they've let go of. Nancy was there, of course. She made small ceramic birds, always in pairs. "Companionship," she said. Matter of fact. Even if it's just metaphor. I liked that. So I started shaping bowls. Not perfect ones. Wobbly. Uneven. But mine. Back at the cottage, I began keeping a list on the inside cover of my recipe book. Things I've done just for me. Week 1. Joined pottery class. Week 2. Said no to something without feeling guilty. Week 3. Cooked dinner for one and lit a candle anyway. Week 4. Walked barefoot in the grass. Week 5. Started a poem. Didn't finish it. Kept it anyway. It sounds simple, but it wasn't. When you've spent your whole life measuring your worth by how needed you are, doing something simply because it brings you joy feels rebellious. Some days I still wrestled with it. I'd find myself standing at the window, wondering if Rachel would call again, if Tommy or Sarah would ever ask to visit, if I should reach out. But then I'd breathe. Look at the lake. Remind myself that silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it's just space. And space can be holy. Nancy and I developed a rhythm. Wednesday afternoons were for gardening. Saturday mornings, we'd meet at the diner 2 towns over for pancakes and coffee. We didn't talk about motherhood much. Not directly, but in the way we chose to hold joy now gently. With 2 hands, I think we both understood something others often missed. We were still women, not just mothers. Still whole. Still capable of delight. One morning, she brought me a teacup she'd made. It was imperfect, the handle slightly crooked. Inside, at the bottom, she'd etched 3 tiny words in glaze. "You still matter." I kept that cup on my writing desk. It reminded me not to shrink when the silence returned. And the silence did come, especially at night. That was when the ghosts of habit knocked the loudest. I'd catch myself halfway through dialing Rachel's number, the phone already pressed to my chest before I realized. There's nothing urgent. You're just lonely. And that was okay. Loneliness, I was learning, wasn't shameful. It was a place to rest. A place to listen. The week before Christmas, I received a small package in the mail. No return address, but I recognized Rachel's handwriting. Inside, a framed photo of Tommy and Sarah, taken at a fall school event. Both of them smiling, arms around each other, leaves tumbling in the background. Tucked into the frame's back panel was a note. "They ask about you more than you think." I show them the lake on Google Maps. They say it looks like a painting. No apology this time. No request. Just that. A soft offering. Like clay. I didn't call, but I placed the photo on the mantel, and that night, I wrote in my notebook, "Love doesn't always return the way you sent it, but sometimes it finds its way back anyway." On the last day of pottery class before winter break, Joy handed each of us a small bag. Inside mine was a tiny ceramic dish, the kind you'd use for rings or salt. On the underside, she'd scratched a single word. Worth. I closed my hand around it, felt its weight, its truth. There's a kind of life I never knew I could have. Not loud or spectacular, but grounded. Intentional. Mine. And now that I've tasted it, I can't go back. I don't know what the future holds with Rachel. I don't know if we'll ever sit together on this porch or make clay bowls side by side. But I know this. I will not disappear again. Not into duty. Not into silence. Not into the shadow of someone else's need. I am Margaret Doyle. I am a mother. But I am also a woman who makes wobbly bowls, drinks tea in a crooked cup, and writes poems she may never share. And for the first time in decades, that is more than enough. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It crept in gently, like a friend who didn't want to intrude. The frost receded one stubborn patch at a time. The lake shimmered again. My garden, long asleep under winter's hush, stirred quietly beneath the thaw. I started waking earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see the sunrise again. I'd missed it for years, always too busy replying to emails, fixing other people's emergencies. Now, the emergencies were gone. And peace, it turns out, has a sound. Birdsong and a kettle beginning to whistle. I'd nearly forgotten what day it was when the small package arrived. A shoebox, wrapped in plain brown paper, no name on the front, just my address in blocky, uneven handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Tommy, my grandson. 9 years old, wild hair, thoughtful eyes, and always slightly behind in spelling. My hands shook a little as I carried the box into the kitchen. I didn't rush. I poured tea first. Saturday down at the table. Let the weight of the box settle in my palms before I untied the string. Inside was chaos. In the best possible way. A folded drawing, done in markers, a house by the lake, a figure in a blue dress standing on a porch, and 2 ducks in the water. I knew those ducks. I'd seen them every morning. Next to the drawing, a tiny clay turtle, painted orange, cracked slightly at the tail. And beneath that, a folded note card. "Hi, Grandma. We made animals in art. Mine is a turtle. I made him for you because turtles live by the lake and go slow and don't hurry and are strong even if they don't look it. Also, I miss you. Love, Tommy." That was all. Just that. And it was enough to undo me. I sat at the table with the note in my lap and the turtle in my hand, and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to since the move. Not because I was sad, not because I wanted to go back, but because something I had quietly mourned the hope of still being seen, still being loved, flickered to life again. I took the turtle out to the porch and placed it on the railing facing the lake. "He says you're strong," I whispered. And for the first time, I believed it. That afternoon, I called Nancy. "Turtle delivery today," I told her. She didn't ask for details. Just said, "Well, looks like spring really is here, huh?" Later, I wrote a note of my own. Not to Rachel. To Tommy. "Dear Tommy, your turtle arrived safe and sound. He's sitting on my porch right now, watching over the lake. You're right, turtles are strong, even if they move slow. And you, my sweet boy, are thoughtful and brave and creative. Thank you for remembering me. I miss you too. Love." Grandma, I mailed it the next morning. I didn't write anything more. Didn't ask for a visit. Didn't try to squeeze myself back into a space I hadn't been invited into. I just let the note go, like a message in a bottle, trusting it would land where it needed to. That evening, I made dinner for one, and set a second place. Not out of hope or longing, just to remember. That love can still arrive, unexpectedly, in the form of a clay turtle and a crooked drawing. That even small hands can open heavy doors. That bridges sometimes start as breadcrumbs. In the weeks that followed, I returned to my list. Things I've done just for me. Week 6. Bought fresh lilacs for the living room. Week 7. Took a solo drive to a lighthouse I'd only ever seen on postcards. Week 8. Sang out loud in the garden. No one heard, except the birds. Week 9. Replied to a letter, not out of obligation, but delight. Margaret Doyle. Still here. Still standing. Still waiting not for someone to fix what was broken, but for the quiet joy of being remembered without being asked. Because sometimes, that's all any of us want. To be thought of. To be loved. Gently. Like turtles. Like spring. Like a shoebox with no return address, arriving just when the snow melts. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. It was the kind of day you don't plan for, the kind that simply arrives without asking permission. The sky was a soft blue, not boastful, just steady. The breeze was light enough to lift the edges of your sleeves, and the sunlight, well, even the dust on my old walking shoes, looked golden under it. Nancy had insisted we go to the spring artisan market. You need to see people, she said. Fresh air, handmade soap, and overpriced jam'll do your soul good. I didn't argue. I rarely won with her anyway. We strolled through the rows of booths set up around the town park. Artists had displayed their crafts like treasures, hand-knitted scarves, jars of pickled peaches, honey in bottles shaped like bears, and pottery. So much pottery. I saw bowls that could double as conversation starters, mugs shaped like mushrooms, and vases that seemed to hum with the fingerprints of their makers. I want to see what the competition's making, Nancy teased, bumping her elbow against mine. I smiled, unsure if I felt flattered or exposed. It had been months since I'd been in a crowd this size. Since I moved to the cottage, my world had gotten smaller, quiet by design. Being here felt strange. Not bad. Just unfamiliar, like finding an old coat in the back of a closet and slipping it on, wondering if it still suited me. We sipped lavender lemonade from mason jars and admired rings I didn't need and wood carvings I couldn't name. I was halfway through describing the absurd genius of a ceramic cup shaped like a toadstool when I heard it. A voice I hadn't heard in person in nearly a year. Mom? I turned. There she was. Rachel. She looked different. Not in a dramatic way. Her honey-colored hair was still pulled into a braid, and the faint freckle on her left cheek still sat where I remembered. But something in her presence had shifted. There was a quietness, a humility in her shoulders, like someone who'd had to face herself in a mirror she didn't expect. She wasn't alone. Tommy stood beside her, clutching his own lemonade, eyes wide and unsure. He'd grown taller. His jeans were too short, probably from a growth spurt no one anticipated. His hair was longer, a little wild, and his gaze flicked between us like he was reading a language he used to know but had forgotten. I felt Nancy squeeze my hand gently. I'm going to check out that jewelry tent, she whispered, and before I could reply, she vanished like a magician's smoke puff. Rachel took a hesitant step toward me. Her voice was careful, like someone testing the ice beneath their feet. I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't either, I replied. Nancy's doing. We stood in that strange space between old memory and present uncertainty, like two people who once shared a house but now shared only silence. Tommy broke the pause. I sent you the turtle. I smiled, something in me softening. I know, sweetheart. He lives on my porch now. Keeps watch over the lake. Rachel looked down at her shoes. He begged to come with me today. Said if we saw you, he wanted to say hi. I'm glad you did, I said. And I meant it. Rachel motioned to a nearby booth. This is our neighbor's stand. She makes beeswax candles, Tommy's favorite. Tommy held up a small paper bag like it was treasure. It smells like vanilla and dirt, he said, his face lighting up with pride. I laughed. That's a wonderful combination. He beamed. And then Rachel asked something I didn't expect. Do you want to walk with us? She wasn't offering a full reconciliation. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or rehashing the past. Just a simple, soft invitation. A walk. Not forever. Not even for long. Just now. I looked at the path ahead, shaded by blooming dogwoods and lined with booths of handmade hope. I looked at Rachel, me daughter standing a few feet away, yet maybe closer than she had been in years. I'd like that, I said. We didn't talk about the letter, or the plastic flower, or the business I'd sold out from under them. We walked. Tommy led the way, stopping at every booth with a name he liked or a trinket he couldn't identify. He asked about bees, about glaze colors, about why people pay for things made by hand when machines can do it faster. I told him about turtles by the dock. Rachel told me about a part-time job she'd taken at a small school, nothing glamorous, but something steady. When we reached the far end of the market, where the breeze carried the scent of pine from the nearby gazebo and popcorn from a stand we hadn't passed, Rachel stopped. "This was nice," she said. "Really nice." "It was," I answered. And it truly was. There were no big declarations, no catharsis, no absolution. Just the kind of quiet that says, maybe we're not done. Rachel shifted the bag in her hand. "Would it be okay if Tommy wrote you more? Sent pictures sometimes?" "I'd like that very much," I said. Tommy looked up at me, his eyes filled with unfiltered sincerity. "I'm gonna make another turtle. A blue one this time, because the lake looks blue from the sky." I bent down slightly. "I'll keep a spot open for him." Rachel smiled then. Not the wide, forced smile I'd seen so many times at forced family dinners, but something small and real, honest. And in that moment, I didn't see the daughter who'd once taken me for granted. I saw a woman flawed, unsure, maybe still healing trying, and that mattered more than any apology ever could. We parted ways near the fudge stand. No promises, no pressure, just presence. Sometimes, that's the hardest gift to give, and the most sacred. 10 minutes later, Nancy returned with a bag of peppermint bark, and that look on her face, half teasing, half knowing. "Well," she said, slipping her arm through mine, "looks like the artisan market gave you more than just jam and soap." "It did," I whispered. "It really did." As we walked toward the parking lot, I let the quiet wrap around me like a shawl. I passed couples laughing, dogs in sweaters, and toddlers chasing bubbles. And I thought, maybe the thing about broken things is, sometimes they don't need fixing, just holding, like clay, like hands, like family, when it's ready. The envelope was small, simple, almost shy in its appearance. I found it one Thursday morning, tucked between a gardening magazine and some advertisement about gutter cleaning. I nearly missed it. No return address, just my name written in careful, rounded letters that I recognized right away. Inside was a blue card, music notes dancing around the border. And there, written in thick orange marker, was Tommy's handwriting. "Dear Grandma, I'm singing a solo at our spring concert. Will you come watch me? It's next Friday, 6:30 p.m. at the school. I'll be nervous but happy if you're there. Love, Tommy." I must have read it 3 times, holding it between my fingertips, like it might dissolve if I blinked too hard. No instructions, no guilt, no pressure, just a child asking his grandmother to be there. Because he wanted me there. Not out of obligation, not because someone told him to, but because he truly wanted me. I sat down at the kitchen table and placed the card in front of me. I couldn't remember the last time someone in the family invited me to something. Really invited me. Most of the time, I heard about birthday parties after they happened, or got a generic text before a holiday. But this was different. This was an olive branch, made of crayon and hope. The days that followed were oddly quiet. I didn't tell Nancy right away. I wasn't ready to say it out loud, afraid the act of speaking it might scare it off like a startled bird. But I thought about it constantly. I thought about that card while I watered my plants, while I folded laundry, while I stirred soup on the stove. Should I go? Not could I. I was perfectly capable. But should I? It wasn't just a concert. It was something bigger. A shift. A question. Did this mean Rachel was softening? Was this Tommy's doing? Was it safe to hope for something more than polite small talk and occasional photo updates? What if I went and Rachel acted like I didn't belong? What if I cried during Tommy's solo and felt like a fool? And what if I let myself be pulled back in only to be pushed away again? 3 nights before the concert, Nancy and I were sitting on the couch watching old episodes of The Great British Bake Off. She had her usual cocoa, and I had mine. The invitation was still on the kitchen counter, the blue card peeking out like it had something to say. I got up, walked over, and handed it to her without a word. She read it slowly, then glanced up at me. "That's a big deal," she said softly. "A solo?" I nodded. "And he wants you there." I nodded again. She didn't offer advice or ask questions. That was the gift of Nancy. She didn't push. She just made space for whatever I needed to feel. "You don't have to decide tonight," she finally said. "But if you do go, I know one thing." "What's that?" She smiled, warm and sure. "You'll be the one person in that room who hears him with your whole heart." On the day of the concert, I woke up early. I chose my softest sweater, the pale blue one that Tommy once said smelled like rain and cookies. I brushed my hair until it gleamed and added a dab of rose perfume I hadn't worn in a year. And as I looked in the mirror, something stirred in me. I didn't feel like someone preparing for battle. I felt ready. Not to prove anything, not to reclaim anything, but simply to show up, to be present. That felt like enough. The school was bright and loud, just like I remembered from years ago. Hand-painted posters lined the hallway. "Spring into song, and you're gonna love our chorus." The auditorium smelled of pencil shavings and glue. I found a seat near the back, not too far to see, but far enough not to assume anything. I didn't know where Rachel would sit or even if she wanted me there. Families filed in, cameras ready. Children giggled and squirmed in their seats. A man next to me gave a polite nod, the quiet kindness of a fellow grandparent. And then the lights dimmed. The curtain lifted, and there he was. My Tommy. He stood on the far left of the stage, a little stiff, his hands twitching at his sides. I recognized that nervous energy. Rachel used to do the same thing before her piano recitals, bounce, slightly on her heels like her body couldn't stay still under the weight of nerves and excitement. The choir sang a handful of spring-themed songs, about flowers and frogs and sunny days. I heard it all, but I was only watching him. Then the group sat down, and Tommy stepped forward. He adjusted the microphone with both hands, his knuckles pale from gripping too tightly. A beat of silence. Then his voice, soft and trembling at first. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." It was high and sweet and full of effort. He sang like the words mattered, like he believed every one of them. By the second verse, his eyes weren't looking down anymore. He was looking right at me, and he smiled. That kind of smile you don't practice. The kind that comes from your soul when something good is happening and you know someone you love sees it. That's when the tears came. Not heavy, not sad, just joy. The pure kind. The kind that sneaks up on you when truth and love meet in a child's voice. After the performance, I stayed near the back, unsure if I should wait or just slip away. But then I heard him. "Grandma!" He barreled into me like a rocket, arms flung around my waist. "You came! You really came!" "I wouldn't have missed it for anything," I whispered. He pulled back just enough to look up at me. "Did you cry?" "A little," I admitted. "Good," he grinned. "That means it worked." Then Rachel appeared, quiet, not interrupting. Her eyes met mine, soft but unreadable. "Thank you," she said gently, "for coming." I nodded. "He was wonderful," she smiled. "He was. You helped make him that brave, you know." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't a wall anymore. It was something softer, something like possibility. That night, back at the cottage, I pinned the invitation to the fridge. Not because I needed a keepsake, but because I needed a reminder that I showed up, that he wanted me there, that maybe, just maybe, something broken doesn't always need fixing. Sometimes it just needs holding, and love, and time. And that evening, I let myself believe, truly believe, for the first time in a long time. We were finding our way back. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. It was late Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet hour where sunlight turns golden and everything in the house feels still like it's listening. I had just finished sweeping the porch. There were a few early leaves falling already, stubborn reminders that even in spring, The seasons never wait for permission to change. That's when I heard it. The soft knock. 3 taps. Polite. Tentative. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door, half expecting Nancy with one of her surprise casserole experiments. But it wasn't Nancy. It was Rachel. And Tommy. He was holding a basket with both hands, trying not to drop it, his whole body tilting forward with effort. "Hi," Rachel said. "Not casual, not stiff, just real." "Hi," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Tommy beamed. "We brought cookies." Rachel nudged him gently. "They're not all cookies," he grinned. "There's banana bread, too." I helped stir. I stepped aside, opening the door a little wider. "Would you like to come in?" Rachel hesitated just for a second, then nodded. "If it's okay. It's okay," I said, and meant it. They stepped inside, and just like that, the house felt full again. Not noisy, not overwhelming, just full. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once read that letter she sent months ago, the one that started to melt the ice between us. Tommy unpacked the basket like he was presenting treasure. Chocolate chip cookies wrapped in wax paper, 2 slices of banana bread, a small jar of homemade strawberry jam with a hand-drawn label that said, "Tommy's Jammy." Rachel handed me a napkin, but her eyes did more talking than her mouth. There was warmth there, gratitude, maybe even peace. "I thought it might be nice," she said gently, "just to drop by." "No reason." I nodded. "I'm glad you did." Tommy bit into a cookie and immediately got crumbs all over the table. Rachel moved to scold him, but I waved her off. "He's fine." I smiled. "That's what tables are for." She laughed. Really laughed. And it struck me how long it had been since I'd heard that sound in this kitchen. We talked. About simple things. Tommy's science project, a volcano made of papier-mâché. Rachel's part-time work at the school library. How the birds at the lake were starting to nest again. No tension. No hidden meanings. Just people. Being together. And then, as he finished his second cookie, Tommy looked at me with a hopeful sort of mischief in his eyes. "Grandma? Yes? Love? Can I come over again next Sunday?" My heart fluttered. "Next Sunday?" He nodded. Hopeful. "And maybe the Sunday after that? We don't have church in the afternoons. And Mom said we could if you were okay with it." Rachel looked up, meeting my gaze, letting him ask first, letting him lead. It wasn't a test. It was an offering. A chance. I swallowed hard against the lump forming in my throat. "I'd like that very much," I said. Tommy grinned and reached into the basket again. "Good, because I have more jam jars I want to decorate." After they left, I stood at the door watching their car pull away, the taillights blinking as they turned toward town. The house was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet. This one felt expectant, alive. There was jam cooling in the pantry, crumbs on the table, 2 mismatched mugs in the sink, and a memory forming one that didn't sting. That night, I sat by the window and wrote the date on my calendar. Sunday, Tommy? I added a little heart. Then I turned the page to the following Sunday and wrote it again. Because maybe forgiveness doesn't have to start with grand gestures or perfect timing. Maybe it starts with banana bread and a jar of jam and a boy who wants to come over on Sundays. Maybe love, when it comes back, wears small shoes and carries a basket. And maybe healing isn't loud. Maybe it's just someone knocking on your door when you least expect it. And you saying, "Come in," not because everything's fixed, but because you're ready to begin again. It started with a phone call. Not a long one, just 3 rings and a familiar voice that said, "Would you be home around 4? We'd like to stop by. Just me and Tommy." I told her yes. And then I sat with that yes for nearly 2 hours, turning it over, wondering what it might mean, what might be said, what might not. By the time the knock came soft, like before I was ready, not because I knew what was coming, but because I'd made peace with not knowing. Rachel held a paper bag in her hands. Rain dotted her shoulders, and her hair was frizzing slightly from the drizzle. Tommy stood behind her, hood up, clutching a book. "We brought soup," she said. "It's still warm." I stepped aside. "Come in." We didn't eat right away. Tommy curled up in the corner chair with his book. Rachel and I moved into the kitchen. She set the bag down and began unpacking slowly containers of soup, a half loaf of bread, and 2 slices of lemon cake wrapped in wax paper. "I didn't know how to start this," she said after a while, her back still to me. "That's okay," I replied. "You just did." She turned then, finally meeting my eyes. "I was angry for a long time," she said. "At you, at life, at myself. And when you stopped stepping in, I thought you stopped caring. But that wasn't fair. I didn't say anything. I let her speak. I see it now. What you did for us, all those years, all the ways you carried us and never asked for anything back. I was too proud to admit how much I relied on you." The rain tapped softly against the window. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and steam. "When everything fell apart," she continued, "I kept thinking you'd show up and save it all again. And when you didn't, I felt abandoned. But you didn't abandon me. You just let me find my own footing." She wiped at her eyes quickly. "I'm sorry for taking you for granted, for being cruel, for making you feel like you didn't matter." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "Thank you for saying that." She let out a shaky laugh. "Tommy says you're teaching him to make jam. He's a natural." She smiled, and it wasn't the tight, forced one I'd gotten used to. It was real. "I want to come next Sunday," she said. "Not to fix anything, just to be here. If that's okay. It's more than okay." We didn't solve everything in one afternoon, but something changed that day. Not a fix, not a reset, just a new chapter, a shared bowl of soup, and a space, finally, where truth could breathe. Sometimes healing doesn't look like fireworks. Sometimes it's just rain on the windows and lemon cake on the table. And a daughter finally seeing her mother not as a safety net, not as a fallback, but as a person, a whole person. And that is more than enough to begin again. It didn't happen all at once. Healing never does. But something shifted after that rainy afternoon. Sundays became something I looked forward to again. Not just for the cookies or the jam making or even the laughter of my grandson bouncing through the living room, but because each visit stitched something back together inside me. Rachel didn't try to rewrite the past. She didn't pretend we hadn't hurt each other. But she showed up, consistently, quietly. And maybe that's what real reconciliation looks like, not big words or perfect moments, but the willingness to return, week after week, even when it's hard. We started planting a garden together, just a small patch in the back basil, tomatoes, sunflowers. Tommy insisted on sunflowers, said they looked like happy people. I told him they reminded me of his grandfather. He didn't ask why, but he smiled, like he understood anyway. The town's Spring Fest came in April, and Nancy convinced me to enter a few jars of jam into the homemade goods competition. I laughed at first, but when she dropped off the entry forms with a wink and a pie, I figured I might as well. I ended up winning second place. Rachel and Tommy were there when they called my name. He whooped like I'd just won the Olympics. I found myself baking again, hosting neighbors, volunteering at the church thrift store on Thursdays. Not because I needed to fill time, but because, for the first time in a long while, I had something to give that didn't feel like a burden. I wasn't just a mother or a bank account, or a woman forgotten in the corner of family photos. I was me again. One afternoon, while we were labeling jam jars, Rachel looked at me and said, "You're different. Softer, maybe, but stronger, too." I didn't quite know how to respond to that, so I just smiled and said, "Maybe I just needed time to remember who I was when no one needed me to be anything else." The truth is, there's a sacred kind of peace in becoming whole without applause, in knowing that quiet joy doesn't need permission, that not every chapter ends in triumph, but some end in stillness, and that's enough. I still miss Thomas sometimes, in the quiet hours, especially. But the ache has become less sharp, more like a song that drifts in and out. I hear his voice in the garden. I see his grin when Tommy runs across the yard barefoot. And I just know he would have been proud. Not of the ribbons or the jam or the garden, but of the way we stitched something back together from scraps. Of the way forgiveness bloomed not like fireworks, but like basil on a kitchen sill. Simple, steady, enough. And when I think about the road ahead, I don't feel afraid anymore. Because I've learned something precious. That you don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to be young to begin again. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to open the door, let the light in, and try again. The last Sunday of spring arrived with a breeze that smelled like honeysuckle and lake water. I had set the table on the back porch, just a simple set-up white plates, cloth napkins, a pitcher of iced tea with lemon slices floating like tiny suns. Tommy was the first to arrive, running ahead of Rachel with a folded paper in his hand. "Guess what?" he said, breathless. "I got an A on my science project. The volcano one." I pulled him into a hug. "I knew you would. You worked hard." Rachel followed behind, carrying a pie she didn't bake but proudly claimed credit for picking up from the local bakery. We ate, laughed, and lingered. It wasn't a special occasion. No birthdays or holidays. Just the gift of time unrushed, unearned, but deeply welcomed. After we cleared the dishes, Rachel stayed behind while Tommy ran down to the dock to count turtles. She looked out toward the lake, then back at me. "You know," she said slowly, "when I was younger, I thought strength meant doing everything by yourself, never needing help, never admitting you were scared." I waited. Sometimes the real things take time to come out. "But now," she continued, "I think maybe strength is something else. Maybe it's admitting when you're wrong, saying sorry, choosing to show up, even when you don't know how it'll go." I reached for her hand across the table. "That sounds a lot like grace to me." She nodded, tears glinting but not falling. "You gave that to me, even when I didn't deserve it." I smiled. We all fall short, but love doesn't. For a long time we sat in silence. Not the heavy kind, the peaceful kind. The kind that wraps around you like a soft quilt. Before they left, Tommy gave me another jar of jam. This one had glitter on the label and the words, "Thank you for not giving up." After the car pulled away, I stayed on the porch a while longer. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees. The garden was blooming. My heart, too. And I thought about everything that had happened, all the loss, the silence, the mistakes, and how, somehow, it had brought us here. To a place not perfect, but real. A place built not on blame, but on brave little choices to begin again. Because healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just whispers, "Try one more Sunday." And so I do. Every time. In the end, what this story taught me wasn't just about family or second chances. It was about something deeper, something sacred. That forgiveness is not about pretending the hurt never happened. It's about refusing to let it define who you become. That love doesn't always return the way you expect. But when it does, even in small and quiet ways, it can rebuild more than what was broken. It can make something stronger, and that sometimes the holiest act isn't shouting or proving a point. It's opening the door, setting another place at the table, and saying, "You can come back, if you're ready," because grace doesn't keep score. It keeps the light on. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of a moment you forgave, or someone you're still waiting to forgive, I invite you to carry that feeling forward. Share this story with someone who might need it today. Leave a comment below. Let others know that healing is possible one quiet choice at a time. And if you'd like more stories like this, stories that honor tenderness, resilience, and the kind of love that never truly leaves, please like this video and subscribe. There's more on the way. More stories that speak not just to the ears, but to the heart. You are not alone, and you are always welcome here.